And welcome to Curiosity, Crime and Cocktail Time. My name is Tammy, and as part of this series I will be bringing you video content about the criminal, the curious and the downright evil. I would like to say a big thank you to Happy Alt Media for giving me this great opportunity to talk about subjects that fascinate me to an audience that hopefully feels the same, rather than just boring the shit out of people down the pub. And a massive shout out to Together Studios for saving me from having to film this on my potato of a phone, for editing and generally making it look like I know what I'm doing. Now, I'm sure most of you out there have seen American Horror Story at some point. Now, if you cast your mind back to season 3, Coven, if you've seen it, I'm sure you remember the fabulous Kathy Bates playing the notorious character of Madame Lalaurie. She was vicious, violent and vile, but was she really? Today I'm going to have a look at the real Madame Lalaurie, and as always, no offence is meant towards anybody involved in these stories or their families, and I will strive to be as respectful as possible. So, pour yourself a cocktail, grab a seat, and I will begin. Marie Delphine McCarty was born on the 19th of March 1787 in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I will be referring to her as Delphine throughout this video. She was one of 5 children, and her parents were considered prominent members of society within the town. They were also slave owners. Delphine was just 4 years old when the Haitian Revolution started. The Haitian Revolution was started by slaves fighting against the French colonial rule in Haiti. The revolution was successful and led to the abolishment of slavery within the state. The result of this reverberated throughout America. Slave owners started to panic that their slaves were going to do the same thing, they were going to rebel and revolt. Now, unfortunately, instead of the slave owners thinking, hey, do you know what, maybe we should look after them, make them want to stay for a bit, they went the opposite way. They figured that if they inflicted stricter discipline and punishments, that the slaves would be too scared to do anything. Slavery was perfectly legal in Louisiana at the time, but it didn't give slave owners permission to treat their property however they wanted. There were laws restricting how much cruelty you could inflict on them, so that makes it all right then, doesn't it? In 1800, at the age of 13, Delphine married a Spanish royal officer called Don Ramon de Lopez de Angelo, and I'm so sorry, I know I pronounced that wrong, but I'm just going to call him Don. Much apologies. Don was the consul general for Spain in the territory of New Orleans, and in 1804 was summoned to appear at the court of Spain. He and Delphine started travelling to Madrid by boat, but Don died suddenly, and only a few days later Delphine gave birth to their first and their only child, who she nicknamed Borquita. Delphine travelled back to New Orleans, widowed and holding her newborn daughter. At the age of 21, Delphine remarried a banker, lawyer and legislator named Jean Blanc. Love saying that. Jean was reputed to be a shrewd businessman with ties to the slave trade and a rather large interest in the inheritance Delphine had received from her mother, some $33,000. And Delphine's mother had also left her a plantation with slaves. Then, as a wedding gift, her father gifted them yet another plantation with more slaves. And do you know how many plantations for slaves one person needs? None. That's how many. They ended up having 4 children together. Maria Louise Pauline, who was disabled, Louise Marie Laure, Marie Louise Jean, and Jean-Pierre Pauline. 8 years later, Jean died, leaving Delphine a widow once more. It was 1825 when a young man named Leonard Louis Nicholas Lalaurie, who we will call Louis, arrived in New Orleans from France. He He was 22, fresh out of medical school and raring to go. He placed an advert in a local newspaper claiming he could straighten crooked backs and correct various other physical deformities, and it is believed that this is where he became acquainted with Delphine. She contacted him to see if he could help her disabled daughter. Letters from Louis's family referred to this and his treatment of the hunchback young lady, which is a delightful bedside manner. Louis was receiving many letters from his father, encouraging him to establish himself as a doctor, marry someone with a few quid in the bank, and come back to France. Now, there were a few mentions of Delphine in Louis's letters, but his father assumed it was because of her social status and how she could further Louis's career, not because she was actually a potential daughter-in-law. Sources describe Louis as a meek and mousy little man, pretty bland and boring, but he must have had something about him because pretty soon him and Delphine were getting down and dirty in the sack. And then soon afterwards she got pregnant and gave birth to their son, Jean-Louis Lalaurie, on August the 13th, 1827. There was a lot of scandal about this at the time. Delphine was a lot older than Louis and they weren't married. They did marry 5 months later though. In 1832, Delphine had the now infamous mansion built at 1140 Royal Street with slave quarters attached. Her, Louis and some of the children lived here together. And around this time there seemed to be a bit of trouble in the marriage, with Delphine claiming to a court that Louis had, and I quote, treated her in such a manner as to render their living together unsupportable. And it was while Delphine was with Louis that her cruelty really started to escalate. Now, there have been many rumours throughout the years of Delphine's treatment of the slaves, and there are differing accounts though. Some claim that Delphine's slaves were, and I quote, haggard and wretched, and that her daughters would be punished if they tried to feed them. Yet some claim she genuinely cared for her slaves. Court records do show that Delphine liberated some of her slaves as a thank you for long servitude. At this point, a lawyer was also sent to inspect the house after rumours of cruelty started to be whispered about around the town. The lawyer claimed there was no evidence of mistreatment of slaves, although he could have been bribed. We have to remember this was a very rich family. One of the most famous stories surrounding Delphine was reported by a neighbour. A young slave girl was running away from Delphine, who was wielding a whip, and the child fell from the roof and died. She was 8 years old. Now, this story has been elaborated on throughout the years. Some say she was 12 and some say her name was Leah. Some say that she was brushing Delphine's hair when she accidentally snagged her, and that is why she was being chased. However, the name Leah wasn't even mentioned until Ghost Stories of Old New Orleans by Jean Delphine, a book published in 1945, so we can't entirely be sure that this was her name. This incident led to another investigation at the Lalaurie mansion. They were found guilty of cruelty towards slaves and had 9 confiscated. And they later brought back these slaves, so I'm not entirely sure it was the most effective punishment really for them. On April the 10th, 1834, a fire broke out in the Lalaurie's mansion, having been started deliberately in the kitchen. When the fire marshals and police arrived, they found a 70-year-old woman chained to the stove by her ankle. This poor woman was the cook and started the fire as a desperate suicide attempt. The police spoke to her and she mentioned that she was scared of being punished. Slaves were taken to the very top floor of the mansion to be disciplined, and they were never seen again. Neighbours and bystanders had run to the burning house to offer their assistance. They could hear screaming coming from upstairs and attempted to break into the attic of the mansion to rescue those poor people. The Lalauries refused to give them the key, and it's almost like they had something to hide. See you, Lalauries. The gathering group of people broke in anyway, and once inside, a lot of them actually vomited from the smell, and it was the stench of human waste and rotting flesh. They moved further into the attic. They found a woman wearing an iron collar. One woman had a severe head wound and couldn't walk unaided. The others found, and I quote, 7 slaves, more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by the neck with their limbs stretched and torn from one extremity to the other. Those that were able to talk told their rescuers they had been held prisoners in the attic for months. They were beaten, covered in bruises and blood. Some had their eyes gouged out. Others had their mouths filled with excrement and sewn shut. There was a woman whose bones had been broken and reset so she resembled a crab. There were others with holes drilled into their skulls, spoons beside them so Delphine could poke their exposed brains. Some had flayed skin and infected wounds. One woman had her limbs amputated and spirals carved into her body. There were people with their organs removed. There were a heap of bodies and organs all on the floor, all in various stages of decay. And most of these people were still alive. Now, it is important to note that a lot of these descriptions were not from the original accounts, so may well have been embellished over the years, as stories tend to be. But some of the original accounts from the mansion did refer to the slaves wearing iron collars with spikes on the inside, slaves that were chained up, starving and with horrific wounds. While the slaves were being removed from the attic, a local judge confronted Louis about what they had found. Louis replied, and I quote, "Some people had better stay at home rather than come to others' houses to dictate laws and meddle with other people's businesses." What a knob. After this discovery, the town residents were rightly outraged and started to attack the Lalaurie's mansion. The sheriff and his officers were alerted, but by the time they got there, the majority of the damage had already been done. During all of the commotion, the Lalauries managed to escape in their horse and cart, driven by their slave, Bastien. They travelled until they finally reached Paris. One of the passengers on the same boat as them was the American poet William Cullen Bryant. He noted in his diary that Delphine was the woman who had, and I quote, committed such horrible cruelties upon her slaves, and that she seemed much affected by the reserve which the other travellers treated her, and was frequently seen in tears. What a shame. Not long after arriving in Paris, Louis left Delphine and departed for Cuba. He never saw his wife and son again. There are a few rumours about the fate of Delphine. Some believe she died in Paris, others believe she faked her death and moved back to Louisiana under a different name. There is a little information about Delphine's life after the house fire, thanks to letters later found between herself and her daughters. And these letters tell of a woman living alone in Paris, a woman with no anger, inflicting no cruelty, a woman who genuinely couldn't understand why she'd been chased down to New Orleans. So, why did Delphine do the things that she did? Maybe she genuinely did not see her slaves as people and saw them as merely property to do with as she wished. Was it worry at losing her slaves? The slave rebellions had left plantation owners on edge and filled with paranoia. One of her uncles had died at the hands of slaves, although this was before she was born. And if it was racism, why didn't it start until later in her life? She had previously liberated some of her slaves. Many of her male family members had slaves as mistresses, and they had children with them. And rather than ignore the children, they would be supported and provided for. Delphine was involved, acting as godmother to many of them. She had a biracial sister as the result of one of her father's affairs, and after their father's death, the sister was left $5,000 and 2 slaves in his will. And far from resenting this arrangement, Delphine gifted her sister a slave as a demonstration of their affection. I'm not sure entirely what's wrong with a bunch of flowers or a nice pen, but you do you, Delphine, you crack on. We also have to consider the time this happened. And was she actually any worse than any of the slave owners at the time? And before anybody comes for me, I am not agreeing with slavery in any way, shape or form. Historian Rasmussen claimed that a lot of slave owners, and I quote, would tie your hands to 4 stakes, then whip you with a cat o' nine tails, and that would leave you bleeding, barely able to move. They also had iron masks to put around your head so you couldn't eat, and they had collars with spikes facing inwards, so the slaves couldn't sleep without getting spikes stuck in their necks. I've got no words. Now, could Delphine have developed a mental health issue that caused her to act so cruelly? When Delphine applied for a separation from Louis, it was claimed that he had, and I quote, beat and wound her in a most outrageous and cruel manner in front of witnesses. Did she snap as the result of an abusive marriage? Her husband was younger than her and didn't really give her a lot of attention, but at the same time, he was paying a lot of attention to the slave girls. Could it have been pure jealousy? Was Delphine just caught and used to distract away from the all too real bad treatment of slaves? She was in a mansion in the town, whereas a lot of the slave owners and slaves were out of the way in rural locations and could quite possibly hide their treatment of their slaves. A lot could have been going on that we are still unaware of. Was it easier to take everything out on one woman rather than having to face up to everything that was actually going on at the time behind closed doors? Or was she more innocent than history has portrayed her to be? Stanley Arthur, who was the president of the Board of Curators at the Louisiana State Museum, said, "I have always thought that Madame Lalaurie was the first victim of yellow journalism." Now, yellow journalism is presenting the news that has little research or legitimacy and tends to concentrate more on scandal and eye-catching headlines, a little like a few certain British red-top tabloids that shall remain nameless. While researching this case, I noticed that everything seems to refer back to Delphine. Now, yes, I'm sure she was involved in the mistreatment of her slaves, and that is unforgivable. But what about her husband? Where is Louis in all of this? Now, he must have known what was going on after his comment to the judge to mind his own business. Could he have even been the instigator? Possibly medical experiments gone wrong, a desperately misguided way of enhancing his career. It was said that some of the slaves had their limbs removed or bones broken and reset, and it did remind me quite a bit of the horrific Nazi medical crimes and experiments. There is no mention of cruelty before she was with him, but it has also been said that he moved out the house months previously, but then why was he there on the day of the fire? Delphine Lalaurie is depicted as a vile, racist, cruel woman who doesn't give a damn about anyone else, especially not her slaves. And this may very well be true, and if it is, it's disgusting. But I keep thinking that her last husband had something more to do with this horrific treatment of other human beings than history has let on. I don't think we'll ever truly know what happened, and I'm sure that as time goes by, the stories will continue to be embellished. The Lalaurie house is still standing today, although the current owner will not allow people inside. But, fun fact of the day, at one point, Nicolas Cage owned the house. And that is the story of Madame Delphine Lalaurie. What do you think? A woman ruined by rumour and scapegoated by others? Or was she just a genuinely evil bitch? Please do let me know what you think in the comments. I love to hear your opinions and discuss them with you. I will leave a link to our Facebook group and blog below. Thanks for watching. Look after yourselves, and I will see you soon. Cheers.